Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Back to Ashes. My name is Phoenix. To the elite members of the channel, thank you so much for your dedicated love and support. It is reciprocated right back to you. Just so everyone is aware, it is just me behind the microphone, recording, editing, and uploading to YouTube. I do not use any sort of AI or voice in any of my videos. So if you would like to support non-AI garbage, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who might need to hear it. And while you're at it, if you would like to join Back to Ashes, hit that subscribe button and make sure you set your notification bell to all. That way you know every time I happen to upload a video. With that being said, it is now time to go back to ashes. For once we arise from the ashes, we are a bigger, brighter, stronger, and a happier person every day. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack or tuck in and get warm. And prepare for your dose of vocal melatonin entitled A True Creepy Mashup. Right after this intro, there will be an ad. I'll read the first story, there will be an ad. And after that, there will be no more ads within this video. I've been a career paramedic, but this happened when I had only been one for 5 years. This has never left me to this day, and I shit you not. It happened exactly like this. I was driving home on a rural highway one rainy afternoon. It was really pouring and traffic had slowed to about 50 miles per hour. I was following two vehicles, and we rounded a bend in the road as a small sports car on the opposite side crossed the center line and hit the small SUV that was leading the three of us. I immediately pulled over and called 911. It was a bad one. I got out to check on everyone. There was wailing coming from the SUV on the side of the road. That's always a good thing, because people are breathing. So I went down into the field past the ditch to check on the sports car. There were two young guys in the car. The force of the impact had driven the engine to where the front passenger seat should be. The passenger was still buckled, his crumpled hand grabbing the oh shit handle overhead. The entire section of car shoved into the back seat area. The back of the car had peeled away, as had the passenger's top of his head. His jawbone jutted out raw and jagged. He was clearly deceased, but I felt for a pulse anyway, all while listening to the gasping, ragged, dragging breaths of the driver. No pulse on the passenger. I tried to figure out how to deal with the driver, but there was nothing I could do. The car had literally wrapped around him, and it would take an extrication team time to get him out. Listening to his dying breathing, I apologized out loud to him that I couldn't do more. Told him I was sorry to leave him, but others needed my help too. In my heart, I knew he'd never make it, so I went to render aid where it was needed. In triage, we call this black tagging, a patient who isn't going to survive. I did what I could for the family in the SUV. Emergency medical people and fire services got to the scene and took over. The entire family had injuries, but all survived. The mother had permanent brain damage and lost an eye. But the whole day, those two guys in the red sports car stayed on my mind. That night, I was home alone and getting ready for bed with just the bedside lamp on, and I heard something in the hallway. It got louder as it came closer down the dark hallway toward my open door. It was like a thump, drag, thump, drag. I absolutely froze. A broken hand curled around the frame of the doorway. And then, that kid from the passenger seat was standing there, busted up just like he was in the car. I'm totally serious about this. He looked at me, and I can't recall the exact words of what he said, but it was something along the lines of, "Hey, my friend wants you to know he understands. He wants you to know he's okay. We both are. Thanks for trying." He stood there for a few more seconds, just looking at me. And then he stepped back into the shadows, letting go of the door frame, and I listened to him drag back down the hallway into nothing. I turned on every damn light I could. I slept with the lights on for 2 full weeks. I clipped out their death notices from the paper later that week. Turns out, they were both high school seniors on their way home from a wrestling tournament. Their car hydroplaned from what the investigation determined. I'd never have recognized the blonde-headed kid had he come to see me in his healthy, unwrecked self. It freaked me the hell out that he came to be busted up. I still have the newspaper clippings. I'll never forget them, nor the ghostly visit. Anyway, that's my experience. I've seen a lot of shit in my 29-year career, but nothing quite that visceral before nor since. My story takes place 19 years ago. I was a 16-year-old girl at the time, about 5'7" and 130 pounds. I like to think I'm strong, but I couldn't have taken on 2 young men. It begins with my mother and stepfather going away on vacation, leaving my 17-year-old sister and me home alone. They did this quite often. My parents weren't winning any parenting awards. My sister and I didn't get along either. She was a nasty piece of work. Luckily, she decided to stay at a friend's house while my parents were away. I was nervous about being alone, so I had my boyfriend staying with me. He was a pugnacious dickhead, but I'm glad he was there. One night, Brett and I were still at my house, and we had just started messing around when I heard a really loud knock at the door. My room was in the basement, but at the landing area between the stairs. You know how some staircases are broken up with a turnaround area? There was a window where I could see the stairs that led up to the alcove of our front door. I could see 2 people standing there, and just as I was peeking out to see them better, one of them saw me. I remember feeling the breath sucked out of my chest. There were 2 young men on my porch. It was almost midnight, and I had no idea who the hell they were. The guy who saw me let his friend know, and they both looked in the window and asked me to come to the door. My boyfriend had gone upstairs to open the door, and I remember freaking out because I told him not to. He was one of those guys who thought he was Mr. Tough Guy and believed he could fight anyone. He was telling the guys to just leave as I joined him at the door. They saw me and called me by name, asking me to let them in. Brett told them to fuck off. One guy, I think he said his name was Wes or Les, something like that, said to my boyfriend, "Come outside. We just want to talk to you." I said, "No thanks, we're going to bed," and shut the door. I was really confused and getting very frightened. They stood on my doorstep for a few minutes, then started knocking again. Wes, Les, or whatever his name is, explained to me, through the door, that he was my sister's friend and that she had told him I was alone at home and that they should come by. I knew my sister, and I believed them. That didn't, however, make me stupid. I told them to leave. They started kicking the door. It was shaking, and I seriously feared it wouldn't hold up. I was so scared that I ran into my kitchen to call the police. I was assured they would be there very soon to lock the doors and stay on the phone. Meanwhile, Brett was still yelling at them, which only served to piss these guys off more. I begged him to shut up, but he just wouldn't listen. I was locking all the doors and windows upstairs while Brett went down to check the basement doors. Down in the basement, there was a huge mudroom area, and it had a thick wooden door made of 2x4 planks, kind of like one of those barn doors. The door had a big old lock on it, some spring-loaded turnbolt, and also a plank to set across it like a barricade. One of the guys was pounding on this door, and Brett heard him tell the other to go try the back door. This stupid door was one of those 1960s things that had a happy little square window right at face level with a little curtain across it. I was at this door, trying to jam a chair under this flimsy knob it had, when I looked up and saw the unnamed guy just looking in at me. I screamed, and the dispatcher asked if I was okay. I barely squeaked out that one of the guys was looking right at me through the window. He was older than me, probably about 20, and he was tall. He looked scary as hell. His dark eyes were drilling into me, and he wore this creepy, placid smile on his face. I'd never seen this man before, but he knew my name. He tapped on the window with one finger, never breaking eye contact, and said, "Becky, let me in." I couldn't breathe. The knob was rattling as he messed with it. He said again, "Let me in, Becky. I just want to see if you're okay. I just want to talk." He stared at me. I didn't say anything. I was just 3 feet from him, with my back pressed to the fridge, when he suddenly started beating on the door and screamed, "Let me the fuck in this house. If I have to break in, I will kill you both. So just open the fucking door." He looked maniacal. Then there was a loud knock at the front door, and the man went silent. He gave me the most hateful sneer I'd ever seen. I heard shouting, and he ran down the back stairs and into the woods along the back of my yard. Brett had gone to the door. It was the cops. There were 2 female officers at the front door, and one was just starting to raise her voice, asking where I was. When I came to the door, too, I was so relieved. I started sobbing. I told them the guys had run away through the woods. Luckily, the woods weren't deep. They actually run along the bank of a large river, and there was a bridge just up from where the woods met the road. One officer ran around to the back, while the other stayed to get a description and take my statement. Officer number 1 came back and spoke to officer number 2. She said she saw them running across the bridge. They both left in a hurry, hopped in the cruiser, and sped off. I was still crying and shaking, but I was absolutely furious at Brett for riling them up. I went to make myself some tea, thinking of all the ways I could kill my sister when she got home. I had so much anger, fear, and adrenaline pumping through me that I could have ripped her to shreds at that moment. 20 minutes later, the cruiser came back. There were 2 guys sitting in the back seat, and the officers wanted me to confirm it was the right ones. I looked through the window and saw them. They still looked terrifying to me. They were in cuffs and couldn't get to me, but I wouldn't get close to them. Neither would look at me. I confirmed it was them, and we spoke a bit. I told the cops about my sister suggesting that these men should come see me. Officer number 2 kind of mumbled, "What a bitch." I had to agree. I pressed charges for attempted forcible entry, property damage — they had broken a window in the living room — trespassing, disorderly conduct, and attempted assault. Initially, they both pleaded not guilty, but later admitted to some of the charges. They both got 18 months in jail and were forbidden to contact me or my boyfriend ever again, and to stay at least 500 meters from me at all times. I never heard from them again. I confronted my sister about it, and of course she denied it, then laughed about it. Laughed at me. She was an awful person. I have no idea what their true intentions were, as they maintained that they were just there to talk to me. I'm thankful I didn't have to find out. So, 2 strange to me guys who just want to talk at midnight? Let's not meet again. This happened 5 years ago, around January 15th, 2020, right before the pandemic. I'm a guy, and I was 19 at the time, in my second year of college in Paris, studying art. With a couple of girls in my class, we decided to go to a Da Vinci exhibition at the Louvre. It was an exhibition that's on display only once every few decades, and it was advised by one of our professors. Anyway, that day we left school at 5 p.m., and we went to a bar nearby before heading to the exhibition. I had a few drinks and quickly got tipsy. I was very skinny back then and hadn't had anything to eat. Then we took the metro and made it to the Louvre. We had time to see the whole thing and do some sketches of our favorite artworks. At 8 p.m., I do believe, we left the exhibition to go home. We all went our own ways. I got on the train that would drop me off in my city. When I sat down, I realized that my phone battery was at 18% and that I had my battery bank, but not the charger. I was annoyed because my phone was the only way I could wake up in the morning. I no longer had an alarm clock at the time. I remembered that I used my phone in class earlier that day for some drawing models and that I had plugged it in to charge it for a bit. So I sent a message in the Messenger class group chat and asked if anyone had seen my charger in the classroom. Some of my classmates would stay in the school for a few hours after our last classes to study or keep working on their projects before leaving for the day. One of them replied with a picture of my charger on a table in the classroom and a text saying, "I took it with me and I'll give it back to you tomorrow morning." I thanked them and thought to myself, okay, now how do I make sure I'll wake up on time tomorrow morning? Of course, it was the only one I had, since all the others were no longer working, and I was the only one at home with this brand, so I couldn't even use my mom's or my brother's. I asked the dude who was sitting next to me if he had a charger I could use, assuming he wasn't getting off the train anytime soon, so I could charge my phone for as long as possible until one of us got off. He replied, "No, I don't, but check at the next station if the store is still open so you can buy one." When we reached the next station, we could see that the store was already closed. The store was on the platform. Then the guy turned to me and said, "It's closed, but I have one at home that you can use. I live right next to the station." I was still a little dizzy from the alcohol I'd had a few hours earlier, and I was getting tired, so my reflexes weren't really on point at that specific time. And so I answered, "Okay," instead of simply asking someone else. In my head, it was like him going to his house, grabbing the charger, letting my phone charge a bit with the battery bank, then giving it back to him and going home. But even this scenario wouldn't have made much sense. The guy was supposed to get off 3 stations before mine. When we reached his station, we both got off. It was January, so it was already completely dark outside at this time. The guy goes, "Follow me." At this moment, I had this horrible feeling saying, "Don't, don't follow him. Go back on that train and go home." I quickly got some kind of anxiety attack and simply let myself go. So I followed him. I knew deep down that what I was doing was completely stupid and senseless, but it felt like I wasn't myself. I was totally stressed out and anxious, and I went with him. We exited the train station and walked to the streetcar station right next to it, then got on the streetcar. The fear was rising as we got there, and it kept getting worse and worse. I was like, what the hell am I doing here? Just leave. Something is not right. Just leave and go home. But I couldn't. I was petrified. At this point, it was like I couldn't even control myself. I think the guy was talking to me the whole time, and I was just nodding to whatever it is he was saying. I wasn't even paying attention to what he was saying. From what I can remember, this man was pretty much taller than me and way stronger than me, and he had a backpack with cartoonish-looking cowheads all over it. We got off the streetcar at the closest stop, walked up the adjacent street, maybe 100 to 150 meters into it, and made it in front of a gate. He opened the gate with his fob, and I stayed in the street, in front of the gate, as he crossed it. He turned to me and said, "What are you doing? Come with me." In my head, I was like, "No." Then I crossed the gate and followed him. This was the entrance to the apartment complex where he lived. After the gate, there was a long trail leading up to a very large patio, with multiple other trails leading to 3 different buildings within the complex. It was nighttime, so I couldn't see much, even though there were a few light poles in the patio. We walked up to his building, which was at the very end of the patio, the furthest one from the exit of the complex. Then again, in my head, I was seeing him throwing the charger through the window to me so I could use it. This still sounds silly and makes no sense at all. And then again, I followed him into the building. We went up the stairs to the 2nd floor and went inside his apartment. Once inside, he said, "You may sit down. I'll be right there," as he turned the TV on, gave me a phone charger that was in the nightstand drawer, and went to the bathroom. I sat down and thought to myself, well, now you're in deep shit. I plugged my phone in. My phone battery was now at 9%. My phone was not charging correctly. I noticed after a few seconds that the charger was ripped, and I had to tilt my phone and the charger in a specific way for it to charge correctly. I looked around me and saw that the apartment was very small and messy. It was basically just a bedroom with a small hallway between the entrance and the main space, with a door to the bathroom in the hallway. There was a corner of the room that was being used as a kitchen. The bed was the only thing I could sit on. It was unmade, and there was a lot of unfolded clothes and clutter on the furniture and on the floor. After a minute or so, he came out of the bathroom and came sitting right next to me on the bed. I still had my jacket and shoes on, and my backpack on my back. I played it cool and was terrified inside. He asked me if I wanted something to drink or eat, and I declined, saying that I would be leaving soon anyway because I needed to wake up early in the morning. He then replied, "We can stay overnight too if you want." And I responded, "No thank you." I was sitting on the part of the bed that was closer to the nightstand, and he was between me and the hallway leading to the entrance door. At this point, he was just watching TV, and I was looking straight in front of me, just staring at the wall, not moving an inch, just petrified. And just like that, out of nowhere, he put his hand on my right thigh. I typically hate physical contact, even with my own family and friends. It was too much for me to handle, so I called my mother. She already knew that I wasn't going to go home right after school because of the exhibition. I was trying to buy some time while I figured something out to just go, without him potentially trying to prevent me from leaving. So I was talking with my mother, just telling her how my day was and my time at the Louvre. And I told her that I was on my way home. I managed to keep my composure, so she couldn't tell that something was wrong. The last thing I wanted was to worry her, panic, and have the guy act up even more. After a few minutes, my mom cut me off and told me that she was getting sleepy and that she needed to go to bed. So she said goodnight and hung up. I was thinking, shit. I looked to my right at the guy. He still had his hand on my thigh. That guy was just straight up masturbating while staring at me. I locked eyes with him for 2 seconds, and suddenly my heart started racing. I was terrified. I almost cried, and I could hardly breathe. I called my dad, and thankfully, he picked up the phone. My parents aren't together anymore, and I was living with my mom. So, my father didn't know about my visit to the Louvre. I did just like I did with my mother, and told my dad about how my day was and what I saw at the exhibition. And I kept finishing most of my sentences with "Dad," so the guy knew who I was talking with and potentially to prevent him from doing something crazier. Obviously, because of the fear, I was unable to talk without breathing heavily. At some point, my dad asked me why I was breathing like that, and I said that I was walking fast to catch my train. Then I told my dad, "Okay, Dad, now I'm going to have to run so I don't miss the train. The next one won't be there for a while." That was obviously a lie. "Please don't hang up. Stay on the phone." And he said, "Okay." I quickly got up without unplugging the charger. It unplugged when I got up and started walking toward the exit. I said, "Gotta go," to the guy. I pressed the doorknob to open the door, but it was locked. I didn't even notice it when I walked in. I panicked even more, and the guy got up, walked over to me, unlocked the door, and opened it. Then he said, "Come back anytime." And he licked my neck. He had his left arm in the crack, so I had to bend to walk beneath it and out of the apartment. And he spanked me as I was walking out. Once I was outside the apartment, I started running, ran down the stairs, even skipped a few steps, ran out of the building, ran across the patio, all the way to the gate. I was finally out of the complex, but I still ran all the way to the streetcar stop. I was just hoping that the guy wasn't following me, or that no one he might know, or that he might have told about me, was looking for me or coming after me. Thankfully, the streetcar arrived right when I reached the stop. The streetcar left, and my father was still on the phone. I said to him, "Okay, I'm on the train now. I'll let you know when I'm home." He told me to be careful on the way, and that he'd be waiting for my message. Then he hung up. From that moment, I felt relieved, but I couldn't help thinking, what if I did not have the idea of calling my parents? What if he went crazier and actually tried to do something more? Or what if he just never let me out of his home? Or that someone else was in there with him? Literally anything could have happened to me. After all, I was in his apartment, in his universe. He could have done anything to me. Now, I only go by trusting my gut, and if I sense anything fishy, I will most definitely listen to my body, pay attention to signs, and of course never talk to strangers in public transit. It was almost 9:30 p.m. by the time I was on the train that would drop me off in my city. I made it home by 10:30 p.m. Everyone was asleep. I let my dad know that I made it, and he responded, "Okay, thank you, and good night." My phone battery was still very low, slightly over 20%, I think. I went to bed, but couldn't sleep for hours. I woke up the morning after, went to school, and my classmate brought me my phone charger. I went on with my day. I only told one of my closest friends about it a year later. When I think about it now, it kind of makes me laugh because of how stupid it sounds. But this truly was the scariest thing I have ever experienced. This is a story, a series of encounters and experiences, really, that has been passed down from generation to generation in the rural mountain community here in my neck of the woods. Everyone knows about it. Everyone has experienced it, even if some haven't spoke of it. In my part of the world, where my father and his family grew up, there are many ghost stories and unexplained creatures roaming the deep hollers and woods. However, one has always intrigued me above them all. I came across the story on a local ghost sightings website made in the early 2000s. Many local legends and ghost stories have been submitted there for all to read, but one has always stuck with me. It goes something like this. Whenever you are walking anywhere on the rural roads in this part of the area, you will always hear someone or something walking directly next to you, deep in the woods, opposite the road. If you stop, it stops. If you keep walking, it will go at exactly the same pace as you and will even mimic your steps. Many locals have experienced this, and it is incredibly eerie. Since the first time I saw the report, I was immediately hooked. Growing up, I would always ask around and tell some of my family and other members who live in that part of the area about the story, and they all said the same thing. It was the devil, or some form of demonic entity. Some even had similar encounters. My uncle, who would go out late at night, hunting coons and other wild small animals, had a very frightening experience one particular night. He was out hunting well into the late night hours, the moon barely illuminating the trees around him. He had a pack of hunting dogs, each loyal to him no matter the odds. However, this one particular night, something had them spooked. They heard or saw something in the darkness that wouldn't go any further into the forest after the area they were chasing. My uncle tried everything he could to make them go deeper. However, they just froze in place. My uncle, rifle in hand, examined the area, still not seeing or hearing anything. However, the dogs definitely did. They started to cower in fear, and as soon as they did, my uncle heard something moving rather quickly through the brush around them, almost circling him in some sort of trap. He knew whatever it was wasn't something to be messed with, especially being an old man out alone. So he immediately began backtracking to the house. The dogs followed him quickly from behind. However, whatever it was began quickly following him from the back, staying in the blackness of the woods around him. He started picking up the pace, and so did it. Finally, feeling frightened by whatever it was, he started running as quickly as he could toward home. The thing started running after him and his dogs all the way to the clearing of his property before finally stopping its relentless pursuit. My uncle ran inside and locked all doors and windows, never stepping foot back outside till morning. I asked many people about the encounter, and all backed each other up, even my grandmother, who was his sister, who remembered my uncle telling them about the incident the very next day, still shaken from the experience. Another story that came up when I asked around was from my mother, whose family friend lived in an old house deep in the middle of the woods years ago. She told me that he always loved the peace and quiet and tranquility it offered. However, things were not as they appeared. She talked to me about remembering, as a child, the man coming to see my grandmother in the mornings, sitting down for a cup of coffee, looking very tired and lacking any sleep, looking as if he hadn't slept in days, weeks even. She recalled the man after being asked by my grandmother what was going on, talking about a demon inhabiting the house, rattling the windows, shaking the house to its foundations late at night, throwing plates and forks, furniture, and the front door slamming open and closed He talked about how it always happened late at night, and he could never get rest because it never let him sleep. This went on for many months, maybe even longer. However, things came to a head late one night when the entity took its torment to the limits, attempting to inflict injury, even death, upon him by throwing glass plates toward his head. He had nowhere to run, being so deep inside the woods. However, the man was of Christian faith and knew of the power of prayer against such beings. He got down on his knees and began chanting and denouncing the demonic presence in the name of Jesus Christ, commanding it to leave him alone and leave his house. The entity, obviously being extremely angered by this, began breaking and throwing even more things inside the home, prompting the man to run outside and into the deep forests, hoping to find a road to leave the area on. Finally, after hours of running, he found one and used it to walk all the way to my grandmother's house early the next morning, where he explained to her the incident from just the previous night. He mentioned how, after running through the woods, he could hear the demon chasing him through the night, never stopping its pursuit until he reached the road. But even then, he recalls how he could hear it following alongside him, deep in the woodline. I need to explain two things before I tell this story. First, I have a sleep disorder, and I've had it my whole life. I sleepwalk, nothing too dramatic. Mostly just doing everyday things while sleeping, like opening the fridge, putting clothes in the washer without starting it, taking the vacuum out of the closet and setting it in the middle of the room, then leaving, that sort of thing. When I was younger, this was an every night occurrence, but now in my late 30s, it's a once or twice a year thing. Second, I am native. I have a healthy respect for the stories of spirits that my ancestors told. On many hunting trips, I would sit around the fire with my dad, listening to him tell stories of the tricks Wendigos play to try to lure you to them. While I'm unsure if I believe the stories of skinwalkers and Wendigos, I don't tend to mess around, just in case. Shoot to roughly 3 weeks ago. My husband and I both work construction. We have hard, long, and rewarding days. Once dinner is over and planning for the next day is complete, the dog's been taken out for the last time, our head hits the pillows, and it's lights out until the alarm sounds. We sleep like the dead. Pretty sure war could break out in our bedroom and thundering tanks and all, and we would sleep right through it, wondering in the morning where all the holes in the walls came from. Our bedroom is fairly good size and has a small bay window in the corner. My husband likes to sleep with the fresh air, so he takes the window side of the bed. This particular night, though, something woke me up. I never wake up. The dogs were quiet, typical Northwest weather. Rain quietly tapping away. No thunder, no heavy winds. I looked over the dark and quiet room over, and nothing was out of place. The only noise besides the rain was my husband's box fan gently humming away. I was confused but decided to adjust my blankets, flip my pillow, and go back to sleep. As I crossed my eyes and took a deep breath to relax, I heard my husband. "Babe, babe, come out here and give me a hand with the boys." Confused and still foggy from being woken from a deep sleep a few seconds earlier, I opened my eyes to the pitch black of the room again. Rarely will one of our 3 dogs need to go out at night, and if one goes, they all will go. We live in an incredibly rural area, and it's easy for them to get lost in the dark woods. Not a good thing when you have bears, coyotes, cougars, and whatever else on your property. Babe, babe, can you come out here and help me with the boys? He called again, voice right against the half open window. Not concerned, just demanding. Annoyed and groggy, I leaned up, propping myself up like a stiff pole of blankets to look at the window. It was too dark to see him. The floodlight is on the other side of the house. Babe, come outside, my husband demanded. It was the third beckoning that bothered me. He was never that pushy. If something was wrong, if one of the dogs had wandered off, he would say that. It's happened before. He would say something like, come watch these two real quick. I can't find Murph. You know, something like that. Something just wasn't right. I was regaining my focus and shaking off the sleepies, quite awake at this point. I knew it was him. My husband has a very distinct voice. He is a Sicilian from Queens and has a very deep, unintentionally loud voice. It was at that moment, staring out the black window, that I realized I wasn't leaning on a pile of blankets. The pile of blankets was breathing. I was leaning on my sleeping husband, listening to him call to me from outside the window. Babe, come outside. The voice came again from the window. I put my hand down on my husband's face. He was there, asleep next to me. But his voice, or what I thought was him, was at the window. I lay down next to him, very, very close to him, and closed my eyes very tight. In moments like these, I'm the type to just try and pretend it's not happening. I didn't hear it again and spent half the next night trying to fight off the spookies. At some point, I finally fell asleep. I told my husband about it the next morning after his, "Oh my God, you look like death" comment. I hadn't slept well. He laughed it off, saying I had probably had a creepy sleepwalking thing. Thing is, when I have a sleepwalking event, I remember nothing. I don't recall dreaming, walking, or anything from those nights, no matter how hard I try. It's like a blackout. I am sure I was awake for this. Every time I think of it these past few weeks, I remember those hunting trips, poking coals around in the fire with a stick while my dad tells his serious yet animated tales of Wendigo tricks to get you to come to them. I know it sounds crazy, but I think there's a Wendigo in my woods. About 3 years ago in September, my friend, I'll call her Agatha, and I drove up the southwestern base of Mount Hood to view planets with her new telescope. We often go to national forests for stargazing or night hikes. We are both experienced woods women. She's been a lifelong camper, and I'm a wilderness survival guide. We've both spent long periods of time in the wilderness. Both of us have had bear encounters, cougar encounters, wolves, elk, moose, you name it. I've also had my fair share of strange encounters with other people in the forests, from stumbling upon occult rituals to people living off grid. But those are all stories on their own. All of this is to say that neither of us spook easily, and we are very used to the diverse sights and sounds of the forests. Agatha had been to the spot we were heading to before. It's a dispersed campsite off a medium-used Forest Service road. We wanted to go to this particular spot because we knew it was high enough elevation that we would lose a lot of light pollution, but not so high we'd run into snow. It was a decent spot for stargazing, with about a 150-foot diameter clearing that was mostly dirt and gravel. Though Agatha had been there before, I never had, and I wanted to drive a bit further up the mountain to see if we could find a slightly less treed view. So we drove another few minutes up the road. Along the way, I spotted a tent about 60 feet off the right side of the road at what looked like another dispersed campsite. The odd thing was, there wasn't a vehicle parked at the site, just the tent. Another odd thing was that it was pretty cold to be camping in a standard 2 to 3 season cab style tent. Night temperatures that time of year at that elevation are around 30 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and that night it was about 36 degrees. When I pointed it out to Agatha, she slowed down a bit to check it out. I was concerned maybe someone had left the tent, and if so, we would take it down and dispose of it properly. So she slowed to about 5 miles per hour, and I briefly shined a light toward the tent, but not directly on it, in case someone was in it and asleep. In the 10 seconds it took for us to slowly drive by, it looked like maybe the tent wasn't fully zipped, and I could see through the mesh door. It also looked like it was improperly assembled. We didn't think much more about it and kept driving. We said we'd check the tent out fully to determine if it was a dumped item on our way back down. We drove maybe another 1 to 2 minutes when the road narrows severely as it curves on an incline. We both are used to sudden changes like that because Forest Service roads are known to be wily. But for whatever reason, Agatha came to a full stop before taking the curve and said, "I don't think we should go any further." I said, "Okay, well, why?" And she said, "I don't know, but I'm turning around and going to the spot we originally came here for." I was slightly concerned because she sounded a bit upset, but I chalked it up to her just being excited to finally use her new telescope. She reversed about 50 feet and turned the truck around to head back down into the clearing. As we approached the spot where the tent was, I took off my headlamp and handed it to Agatha so she could shine it out her window on the left side of the road toward the tent. The weird thing was it seemed like it had moved 30 to 50 feet down the road. It just didn't seem like it was in the same spot as before. Once we saw it to the left of the headlights, she came to a full stop on the road, right in front of us. What was even creepier was that it now seemed to be closer to the road than it was before. But since I wasn't thinking too much about it the first time around, I just assumed it was one of those fallible eyewitness memory moments and let it go. But I could only let that go for about 5 seconds. I don't know what came over Agatha, but she decided to shine the headlamp at full blast directly on the tent. I said, Whoa, wait a minute. We still don't know if there might be someone sleeping in there." But as soon as I looked at the tent, I shut up. I stared at it for about 10 seconds before I said, "What the fuck are we looking at? Is that a tent?" Agatha said, "Yeah, I think so. It's just upside down." I blinked my eyes a bunch, thinking maybe the cold air caused them to water and it was messing with my vision. I stared at it for another 5 seconds, and I don't know how else to explain this, but it looked like I was staring at a Picasso painting of a cabin-style tent. Nothing was where it was supposed to be. I looked away for a few moments, thinking I should have brought my glasses, and I couldn't believe my night vision was suddenly so awful. At this point, I noticed a feeling of uneasiness creeping up around me, but I shrugged it off. I asked Agatha if she saw anyone in the tent. She took a few seconds to answer me and said, "Dude, to be perfectly honest, I don't know what the fuck I'm seeing. But yeah, I think I see someone's bare legs sticking up in the air." My heart went straight to my throat, and I immediately thought, oh no, someone is in fact inside, and they're either dead or dying of exposure. Agatha whispered, "What the fuck is that?" I looked toward the tent again, and for a split second, it almost looked like there were, in fact, someone's bare legs sticking up, as if they were on a cot in the dead bug position with slightly bent knees, but this was through the mesh part of the tent door, so I couldn't make it out fully. I blinked my eyes a bit because, for whatever reason, this damn tent was hard to look at. And when I opened my eyes, in just that millisecond of blinking, the mesh door was closed and the legs were gone. This whole time, it still looked like a Picasso painting, and I started to get a headache because it felt like my brain couldn't reconcile what I had seen, even though it was a seemingly ordinary object. It was so disjointed and out of proportion and seemed to shift every time I blinked. Agatha stared at it, mumbling, "What the fuck?" every few seconds, when she suddenly shook her head, rolled up the window and said, "Let's just go. Someone is probably sleeping in it." I have no idea why she came to that conclusion or why I went along with it, aside from that being the only reasonable explanation at the time. We both experienced out of the ordinary things in the wilderness. So, while this was definitely strange and caused both of us to be on higher alert, we didn't panic, and we rationalized the weirdness away. But of course, that didn't last long because this night was determined to be strange. We left the tent, and whoever may or may not have been sleeping in it, and we pulled into the gravel clearing 5 minutes down the road. We both put on our headlamps and scoped the area for trash and critters. The first odd thing to happen at this area is that while we were at the edge of the clearing, Agatha almost fell to the ground on her face. What's weird about this is the fact that she's an avid outdoors woman, lots of experience, walking at night on the off trails with or without a light, and not tripping or falling. About a minute later, the same thing happened to me. As I walked from the edge of the clearing back to where we'd set up a tarp and blanket, I tripped and almost fell backwards. This happened to both of us about half a dozen times, tripping over nothing and tripping over our own feet. It almost felt like the ground wasn't where it was supposed to be. Rationally, I could say everyone has off days, and in my case, I hadn't been there before, but she had, and she was familiar with the area. Plus, I routinely visit new places many times, and I don't recall ever tripping and stumbling like this outside of treacherous terrain or creek walking. So I don't know. Make of that what you will. Again, we brushed off the weirdness, and she went about setting up her telescope. I lay down on the tarp while she tried to get Jupiter in view. She spent maybe 3 minutes setting up the telescope and about 30 minutes trying to lock in on Jupiter. Every time she got it lined up in the scope and took a moment to stand up straight, so all of 3 to 5 seconds, she bent down to the eyepiece again and Jupiter was gone. That whole time I was lying on the ground on a tarp with a crocheted blanket draped over me, perfectly comfortable. I didn't notice just how comfortable I was until she asked me to come over and look through the scope to see if I could keep Jupiter in sight. As soon as I stood up, I noticed a temperature change from where I was lying down. It was suddenly way colder, not like a wave of cold air. The air was still. It was like the temperature on the ground was 15 to 20 degrees warmer than the ambient temperature. I also couldn't keep a bead on Jupiter, and after another 5 minutes of trying, we gave up and lay down on the tarp for some stargazing. After chilling out for a few minutes in silence, I realized that Agatha didn't have a blanket, so I asked her if she would like to share mine. She said, "No thanks, I'm not cold." That was odd because she is one of those people who is always cold. So for her to decline a blanket was just another check on the list of anomalies of the night. I mentioned that to her, and that I noticed a change in temperature from about 10 to 12 inches off the ground. I wished I had thought to put my hand directly on the ground to feel if it was cold or not, but at the time, none of this was registering as a red flag or something to pay much heed to. As I was staring up at the sky, which was perfectly clear, I noticed that it was split in two, running east to west. The best way I can describe it is that there was an invisible line demarcating half of the sky into the northern and southern section. The northern side was somehow lighter than the southern side. It almost looked like the north side was affected by light pollution, whereas the south was not. But it gets even stranger. As soon as I noticed the split sky phenomenon, I also noticed the stars on either side were twinkling at different rates. As soon as I noticed the stars, the split reversed. The south was now lighter and the north darker. I pointed this out to Agatha. She watched for a while and confirmed she saw the same thing happening. We chalked it up to some unknown natural phenomenon. I have yet to get a solid answer on how this happened. It wasn't a light pollution dome or a light dome of any kind, because this demarcation was stark, not at all diffused or fuzzy. The sun had set at least an hour and a half earlier, so it wasn't a twilight wedge either. It also could not have been due to anti-crepuscular rays because we were facing west. I would love for a meteorologist to weigh in on this. Another 10 minutes passed, and I was so comfortable I felt like I could fall asleep. In fact, I was starting to close my eyes when Agatha suddenly sat up and shook me. She said she saw a light coming from approximately where the Picasso tent was, through the tree line to the southwest. I didn't bother sitting up and just turned my head to look in that direction. I asked if she thought it was a flashlight, and she said maybe, but it seemed to be too high off the ground. I said it probably was the person who was staying in that tent, and maybe they had just gotten back from a night hike or were going to the bathroom. She agreed and laid back down on the tarp again. Some time passed. I lost track of the minutes as I was starting to doze again, but I guess it was anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes. I was perfectly comfortable, lulled into the light sleep, when I suddenly sat bolt upright. Agatha was still lying down and appeared to have fallen asleep. There was no noise. Nothing discernible woke me up. I looked toward the tree line to the southwest and saw a light. For a split second, I was congratulating myself for having such sharp senses that I could tell when someone was walking with a flashlight that far away. But that faded quickly when I noticed another light and another. I had one of those moments where my mind couldn't piece together what I was seeing and couldn't match it to anything I had seen before. There were a total of 3 lights, or orbs. I wasn't seeing beams of light emanating from a flashlight. I was seeing orbs of light floating independently through the upper half of the tree canopy toward us. They were maintaining a triangular formation, but were rotating around one another. They had a bluish hue, kind of like a cheap LED sun lamp. I couldn't say for certain how large they were because I had no frame of reference aside from the tree line, which was about 50 feet away from where I was sitting. But the blue orbs were not directly at the edge of the clearing. They seemed to be much further away. I could tell they were coming toward us, as they appeared to be getting slightly larger as I stared at them. I shook Agatha and pointed toward the tree line. She turned her head in that direction and shot up to her feet. She grabbed her telescope, and I stood up and wadded up the tarp and blanket. We threw everything in the bed of her truck, even without putting the telescope back in its case or anything, and floored it out of there. I have never felt the kind of dread that I felt on the mountainside that night. I was in full fight-or-flight mode. To such a high degree, I felt like I wanted to run while in the truck. The panic was so awful that my breathing was erratic, and my hands went numb for a few minutes. We didn't speak until we got fully out of that forest and onto Highway 26. Once we saw another car passing in the opposite direction, we both sighed with relief and started in with a bunch of what the fucks. To this day, I don't have any answers. It was such a bizarre mishmash of innocuous occurrences. Each thing on its own was barely strange. But I can't help but think that the temperature change, the ground being wonky, the Picasso tint, and the split sky were somehow related to seeing the orbs. Then again, it's the brain's job to try to make sense of everything, even when there's nothing to make sense of. Our panic reaction and shared sense of dread was also very strange and out of character for both of us. It was a sudden visceral reaction. It felt like there had to be something else at play to make us both react that way. Hopefully, maybe someone else has been in the same position we have and can provide a rational explanation. And that, dear listeners, brings a close to a truly creepy mashup. I'd like to take a moment and acknowledge the rest of the members of Back to Ashes. Thank you all so much for sticking by the channel's side, for your dedication and love, and everything else that you do. You leave me speechless at times. As I always like to say, without you, I wouldn't have a voice, and Back to Ashes wouldn't exist, and I would be sitting here talking to this microphone by myself. Thank you all. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you kindly. If you are awake, I hope you've enjoyed these collections. Until next time, please stay vigilant and take care of yourselves. I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourselves a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening. Peace, love, and light to you all.